She woke up before the alarm most mornings, not because she wanted to, but because her mind would not let her rest. The small room was still dark, and the air felt cold even under the thin blanket. She lay there for a moment, listening to the sounds outside, the early buses, a dog barking far away, someone coughing in another apartment. Another day was starting, whether she felt ready or not. She moved slowly, careful not to make noise, even though she lived alone. Old habits stayed with her. The mirror in the bathroom showed tired eyes and a face that looked older than her years. She splashed water on her face, tied her hair back, and pulled on the same uniform she wore every day. It had been washed so many times that the color had faded, but it was clean, and that mattered. The walk to the diner took about 15 minutes. She passed closed shops, cracked sidewalks, and people hurrying to jobs that probably paid more than hers. The diner sat on a corner, small and plain, with a flickering sign that buzzed when it rained. It wasn't a place people talked about, but it stayed busy enough to survive. Inside, the smell of coffee and fried food wrapped around her like a familiar blanket. She clocked in, tied on her apron, and started her shift. Her job was simple: take orders, refill cups, smile even when her feet hurt. Some customers were kind. Some barely looked at her. Others treated her like she wasn't even there. She didn't complain much. Complaining didn't pay bills. Rent was due soon, and her phone company had already sent a warning message. She counted tips carefully at the end of each shift, hoping they would be enough. Sometimes they were. Sometimes they weren't that by lunchtime. The diner was full. Plates moved quickly from kitchen to table. Her feet ached, but she kept going. She had learned how to smile with her mouth while her mind stayed somewhere else. When the rush slowed, she wiped down the counter and looked out the front window. That was when she noticed him again. He sat on the sidewalk across the street, leaning against the brick wall of an old building. His clothes were worn and didn't match. His shoes looked too big, like they had been donated without care. A small bag rested beside him. He didn't hold a sign or ask for money. He just sat there quietly, watching people pass. She had seen him before, many times. Most people walked around him as if he were part of the street. Some crossed the road to avoid him. A few looked at him with quick fear or disgust. No one stopped. During her break, she stood near the trash bins behind the diner. Inside were plates scraped clean, half sandwiches, untouched fries, slices of bread that had never been eaten. At the end of the day, all of it would be thrown away. Perfectly good food, wasted without a second thought. She hesitated. Helping someone could get her into trouble. The manager had rules. Food was not to leave the diner. But she also remembered nights when she had eaten crackers for dinner. Counting coins and hoping tomorrow would be better. She wrapped a few leftovers in clean paper. Her hands moving fast, her heart beating harder than it should have. She glanced around, then stepped outside. The man looked up when he heard footsteps. His eyes were sharp but tired. She stopped a few feet away, unsure of what to say. Words felt heavy in her mouth. "I was going to throw this out," she said finally, holding out the package. "It's still good." For a moment he didn't move. Then he nodded once, slowly, like someone who didn't want to scare the moment away. "Thank you," he said. His voice was calm, polite. Not what she expected. She gave a small smile and stepped back. "Take care," she said, already turning away. She didn't wait to see him eat. She didn't want praise or thanks. She just wanted to do one small thing that felt right. The rest of the shift passed like any other. Orders, noise, tired legs. But something inside her felt different, lighter in a quiet way. When she finished work and walked home, the street seemed less heavy than usual. The next day, he was there again. She noticed him through the window, while refilling sugar containers. He sat in the same place, his bag beside him, his posture straight despite the hard ground. When their eyes met through the glass, he gave a small nod, not a wave, just an acknowledgement. Later, when food was left over again, she did the same thing. Wrapped it. Stepped outside. This time, he smiled. "You don't have to do this," he said gently. "I know," she replied. "But I want to." They didn't talk much. A few words here and there. About the weather. About the diner being busy. Nothing personal. She didn't ask how he ended up on the street. He didn't ask about her life. It was an unspoken agreement. Respect without questions. Days turned into weeks. The routine stayed the same. Long shifts. Tired feet. Quiet kindness passed from one human to another without anyone else noticing. Some coworkers began to notice her stepping outside more often. "You feeding that guy again?" One of them asked with a laugh. "Careful. People will start expecting it." Another warned her she could lose her job. She listened, but didn't argue. She just nodded and went back to work. Fear sat in her chest, but it didn't stop her. She knew what it felt like to be hungry. She knew what it felt like to be invisible. The man never asked for more. Never complained. Sometimes he shared a short story about something he saw on the street, always thoughtful, never bitter. She noticed how he thanked her every time. As if the food was something precious. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the air cooled, she handed him a small bag with soup and bread. "You're kind," he said softly. She shrugged. "Just human." He looked at her for a long moment, as if memorizing her face. "That matters more than people think," he replied. She didn't understand why those words stayed with her all the way home. She just knew they did. At the end of that week, the diner was especially busy. She barely had time to breathe. By the time she thought about leftovers, everything had already been cleaned. She felt a small sting of guilt as she locked the back door. She glanced across the street. He wasn't there. She told herself it was nothing. People moved around all the time. Still, as she walked home, she found herself looking over her shoulder, half expecting to see him sitting quietly in his usual place. She didn't know it then. But this simple habit, this small act done without reward, had already started something far bigger than either of them could imagine. And for now, all she knew was that tomorrow, she would wake up early again, put on her faded uniform, and show up just like she always did. She woke up the next morning, feeling the weight of yesterday's work still in her legs. The bed felt hard, the blanket thin, and the air slightly colder than before. She got dressed quietly, careful not to wake the neighbors, and walked to the diner. The street was empty, the city still waking up, and she found a small comfort in the silence. When she arrived at the diner, she noticed a small movement across the street. He was there, sitting in the same place as always, with his bag beside him. For a moment, she froze, unsure what to do. The past few weeks had built a silent connection between them, a bond that didn't need words. She smiled slightly and went inside to start her shift. The morning rush came quickly, with coffee orders, breakfast plates, and people in a hurry. She moved from table to table, her hands skilled from years of practice, her mind divided between work and the man waiting outside. Occasionally, she would glance through the window, seeing him patiently sitting, watching the world go by. Her break came, and without thinking, she wrapped a small plate of leftovers. She stepped outside, heart pounding in a strange mix of nerves and routine. He looked up at her, eyes alert and calm. "Morning," she said softly, holding out the food. He nodded and took it carefully, as if it were fragile. "Thank you," he said, voice steady. "I appreciate it." She smiled, feeling warmth she couldn't describe. "Take care," she replied, stepping back inside before anyone saw Dot as days passed. They began to exchange a few words each time she gave him food. Nothing deep at first, just small observations about the weather, the street, or the diner. She learned he had a quiet way of noticing things most people ignored. A child playing in the distance. A pigeon perched on a ledge, the way light reflected off windows. One afternoon, she asked cautiously, Do you have somewhere to go?" He shook his head. "Not really. But it's fine. I manage." She felt a pang of sadness, but said nothing. She had no solutions, no space to offer, only small acts of kindness. Still, she continued, feeling that even this little help mattered. Some coworkers began to notice. They whispered when she stepped outside. "Why do you bother with him?" One asked, a smirk on her face. Another said, "He's never going to change. Don't waste your time." She nodded politely and said nothing. Their words stung, but they did not stop her. She had learned long ago that doing the right thing was not always popular. She also learned that some people would never understand. The homeless man, in turn, began to notice small details about her. He would ask, "How was your shift today?" Or, "Did you get enough rest last night?" His questions were simple but thoughtful. He didn't pry into her personal life. He simply observed, noticed, and remembered. It was strange how much it mattered to her, how a few words from him could ease the stress that weighed on her daily. One rainy day, she saw him shivering under his thin coat. She wrapped an extra sweater around the plate she carried and stepped outside. "Here," she said, offering the food in warmth. "Take this. You'll stay warmer." He looked surprised, but accepted it. "Thank you," he said, eyes meeting hers. "This is more than food." She felt a lump in her throat and turned away before he saw it. That moment, more than anything, made her realize that even small kindness could reach farther than she imagined. Weeks turned into months. She continued working long shifts, managing bills, counting tips, and quietly worrying about rent. She sometimes went home hungry herself, eating only what she could afford. But she never skipped giving him something when she could. During this time, she began to notice more about him. He was intelligent, thoughtful, and unusually composed. He didn't ask for money, didn't complain about his life, and never made her feel uncomfortable. In many ways, he carried himself with dignity, even in his rough clothes. She started to wonder about his story, but did not ask. Some things, she thought, were his alone to share. One evening, as the diner emptied and the sky darkened, she stepped outside with the usual leftovers. He was sitting with his back to the wall, hands folded on his lap. When he saw her, he smiled faintly. "You didn't have to," he said softly. "I know," she replied. "But I want to." He nodded, a small gesture full of understanding. Then he spoke again, his voice low. "You notice things most people don't. It's rare." She laughed nervously. "I guess I just look." He studied her for a moment, as if measuring the weight of her words. "It matters," he said again. "Even if no one else notices, it matters." The walk home that night felt lighter. Her feet were still tired, her body still sore from the day's work, but something inside her felt different. A quiet recognition that her actions, small as they were seen and appreciated in ways she hadn't expected. Some days, he would talk a little more. About a flower growing through a crack in the sidewalk. About a stray dog he had seen wandering the streets. About the colors of the city at sunrise. He never shared his troubles, but he shared observations that made her see the world differently. She began to look beyond her own problems, noticing little things she had missed before. One afternoon, a sudden argument broke out inside the diner. Customers upset over orders, dishes flying, voices raised. She felt overwhelmed and tense. Stepping outside for a moment of calm, she saw him sitting there, quiet as ever, observing the world. For a moment, the noise inside seemed distant. His calmness reminded her that not everything depended on her control. Some things just needed patience and understanding. They continued this quiet routine. She gave him food, he accepted politely. They exchanged small words of thoughtfulness. No one else could have guessed how much those brief interactions meant to her. No one else knew that they made the days easier, brighter, somehow lighter, despite all the struggles. One evening, as the sun painted the sky orange and pink, she handed him a plate of food. He looked at her, eyes calm and serious. "You shouldn't have to do this," he said. She shook her head. "I do it because I want to, because it matters to me." He nodded slowly, as if understanding something deeper than her words. Then he smiled faintly and said, "You're rare. People like you don't come along often." The words stayed with her as she walked home. They weren't compliments she was used to, and they didn't feel like praise. They felt honest. And honesty, she realized, was worth more than anything got at home. She unpacked the small groceries she could afford that week. She made a simple meal for herself, thinking about him sitting outside, quietly surviving, quietly observing. There was a connection forming, subtle and unspoken. A recognition that both of them were trying to get through the day the best way they could. That night, she fell asleep thinking about the man and the small acts that had brought them together. She didn't know his full story, and he didn't know hers. But the shared understanding of kindness, patience, and quiet respect formed a bond neither could explain. As the weeks rolled on, their small conversations became more natural. He began asking about her day before taking the food. She began asking how he managed through the weather. There was a rhythm to it, a quiet dance of human connection that was simple, steady, and real. One rainy morning, she brought an extra umbrella from the diner. He hesitated at first, then took it. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know," she replied, "but I want to. It's just a little thing." He smiled, genuinely this time. "Little things matter," he said, and she knew he was right. Little things mattered. That simple recognition, that shared understanding, was enough to keep her going through hard days, tired legs, and long shifts. It was enough to remind her that even in a city full of people who ignored each other, someone could notice. Someone could care. And that, she realized, was powerful. She woke up that morning with a restless feeling. The street outside her small window was quiet, and the city seemed to move slower than usual. She got dressed quickly, tying her hair back, and walked to the diner. As she turned the corner, she scanned the sidewalk, but he wasn't there. The empty corner felt strange, like a piece of her routine had vanished. Inside the diner, the morning rush began as usual, plates clattering, cups clinking, people chatting. She moved from table to table, taking orders and serving food, but her mind kept wandering. She worried about him, about where he might have gone, and if he was okay. That small, quiet connection she had with him had become a bright spot in her day, and without him, things felt dimmer. During her break, she stepped outside and walked slowly along the street. The corner where he usually sat was empty. She felt a mix of sadness and helplessness. She remembered his calm demeanor, how he watched the world quietly, and how their small exchanges of food and conversation had made her days feel lighter. She wondered what he had been dealing with, and why he had disappeared without a word. For several days, she kept checking the corner, hoping to see him return. Each morning, she held her breath, and each day the space remained empty. She noticed little things more than ever: the way sunlight reflected off shop windows, the laughter of children, the way a stray cat darted across the street. His absence made her notice these small details, but it also made her realize how much his presence had meant. Her coworkers noticed her distraction. "You seem off today," one said. She smiled faintly and nodded, not ready to explain. No one else could understand the connection that had grown silently between her and him. It was more than kindness. It was a quiet, mutual understanding. By the end of the week, she was restless. She closed the diner, counted her tips, and walked home slowly. The usual sense of relief after a long day was missing. Her feet ached, and her body was tired, but her mind kept returning to the empty corner. She wished she could do more to help him, to ensure he was safe. Then, one Monday morning, she saw movement across the street. Her heart lifted. She rushed to the window and saw him standing there, his bag beside him. Relief and happiness washed over her. He was back. She grabbed a small plate of leftovers she had saved, wrapped it carefully, and stepped outside. He looked at her, surprise and calm in his eyes. "I didn't expect to see you," he said softly. "I was worried," she admitted. "I didn't know where you went." "I had some things to handle," he replied. "Things I couldn't explain." She handed him the food, and he took it gently, eyes meeting hers. "Thank you," he said. "It means a lot." From that day, he returned regularly, but there was a subtle change. He seemed quieter, more thoughtful, sometimes distant. Their routine continued: small conversations, shared observations, meals exchanged, but there was a new depth in his presence. A quiet mystery she couldn't yet understand. She noticed small details about him she hadn't before. He would pause to observe a flower growing in a sidewalk crack, watch the sunlight on the pavement, or quietly follow the movement of pigeons. He didn't talk about his life, but his eyes carried thoughtfulness and depth. She wanted to ask, to know more, but she held back. Some stories are not ready to be told. One rainy afternoon, she stepped outside with a plate of soup and bread. He shivered under his thin coat. She handed it to him, wrapping it carefully to keep it warm. "Here," she said. "You'll stay warmer with this." He looked at her surprised, and then nodded. "You shouldn't have to do this," he said softly. "I know," she replied. "But I want to." He smiled faintly. That moment, she felt warmth, not just from the food, but from the recognition that someone noticed her care and appreciated it. It was a quiet but powerful feeling. Weeks passed, and the rhythm continued. She worked long shifts, faced daily struggles, and gave him food. He received it, shared small observations, and began to quietly look out for her, as well reminding her to stay safe on late nights, noticing if she seemed tired or stressed. The small gestures became a mutual exchange, comforting and grounding. One evening, she closed the diner and walked home. She noticed him sitting across the street, quietly watching her. He didn't approach, he didn't call out, just observed. His calm presence contrasted sharply with the chaos she often felt, reminding her that not everything needed to be controlled, that patience and understanding were sometimes the only answers. The next morning, he was in his usual spot. "I've been thinking," he said as she approached. "About what?" she asked. "About the little things," he said. "The things people ignore. The acts of kindness that go unseen." She nodded. "Yes, those things matter, even if no one notices." He looked at her steadily. "I've seen it in you. The way you treat people, even when you think no one is watching." She felt a lump in her throat. Words like that, simple but honest, were rare. "Thank you," she whispered. For a long moment, they stood there, connected by understanding, presence, and recognition. There were no promises, no expectations, only the quiet acknowledgement of each other's humanity. It was enough. Days turned into weeks, and the routine remained. She continued her long shifts and small acts of care. He continued to observe, share quiet thoughts, and participate in their subtle connection. Occasional smiles and small conversations spoke volumes without needing more words. One cold evening, She noticed him shivering. She handed him a coat she had saved from a donation pile. He took it gently, surprised. "You shouldn't have to do this," he said. "I know," she replied. "But I want to. Small things matter." He smiled, genuinely, and said, "Yes, small things matter. More than most people realize." She realized he was right. The quiet, unnoticed gestures, the small words, the little exchanges, they built trust, understanding, and a bond that did not require explanation. They created something bigger than either could see. As the month ended, she reflected on the changes in her life. Not through grand gestures or sudden luck, but through small, consistent acts of kindness. She felt stronger, more human, and more connected. She knew, even if no one else ever noticed, these moments mattered. They mattered to him, and they mattered to her. That knowledge, that shared understanding, was enough to keep her going, keep her caring, and keep believing that even in a world that often overlooks kindness, a single act could change everything. The mornings were colder now, and the city streets carried a quiet chill that made her pull her coat tighter around her. She hurried to the diner as usual, her mind preoccupied with her long list of tasks, but also with the thought of him. The little corner where he usually sat across the street had become a part of her daily routine. Even on the busiest mornings, she found herself glancing toward it, hoping to see him there, hoping that he had eaten and stayed warm. He was there. As always, though he seemed quieter, more contemplative than before. He had a small blanket wrapped around him, and his bag sat neatly by his side. When he looked up and saw her approaching, a soft smile crossed his face, and she felt a warmth in her chest, despite the winter cold. She waved at him and carried a plate of warm food from the diner, carefully wrapped to keep it hot. "Good morning," she said as she neared him. "Morning," he replied quietly, his voice calm but grateful. "Thank you." They exchanged a few words about the weather and the people walking by, about the cold air and the gray sky. It was a small ritual, one that neither of them thought much about at first, but over time it had become an unspoken connection. She noticed the way he observed little details: a bird landing on a street sign, a small puddle reflecting the muted sunlight, the way the wind carried leaves along the sidewalk. He saw what others did not notice, and she found herself intrigued by it. Inside the diner, the day was as hectic as ever. Plates clattered, coffee cups rang against the counters, and the hum of conversation filled the air. She moved from table to table, refilling drinks, taking orders, and trying to keep up with the constant flow. Yet her thoughts drifted back to him, wondering if he had found shelter for the cold morning, or if he had to spend hours just sitting there in the biting wind. Even in the busiest moments, her mind returned to that quiet corner across the street. During her break, she stepped outside with a bowl of soup and some bread, holding it carefully. He looked up at her, and she noticed a slight shiver. "Here," she said softly, handing him the food. "This will help keep you warm." He accepted it with a faint smile. "You don't have to," he said. "I know," she replied. "But I want to. Small things matter." He nodded, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply stood there, acknowledging each other's presence. There was a quiet comfort in those small exchanges, a feeling that they were both recognized and cared for in ways that words could not fully express. Over the next few days, she noticed subtle changes in him. He seemed more aware, more focused on the details around him. He paused to notice a flower growing through the cracks in the sidewalk, the sound of children laughing from a nearby schoolyard, the patterns of frost forming on the windows. He shared some of these observations with her in brief, quiet conversations. "Did you see that?" he would ask, pointing at something small but beautiful. And she would smile, amazed at the way he noticed things she had overlooked in her own busy life. One chilly afternoon, she approached him with a small meal, and he looked up with a serious expression. "I've been meaning to tell you," he began. "I've seen so many people ignore the world around them. People don't care about the little things, about others struggling. When you started giving me food, noticing me, it mattered more than you could know." Her chest tightened at his words. "I just wanted to help," she said softly. "That's all." "It's more than that," he replied. "You treated me like I mattered. Like a person, not someone to be ignored." They stood there in silence, the sounds of the city distant, and she felt something shift inside her. She realized that the small acts of kindness she had given without expecting anything in return had touched him deeply. They had created a bond neither of them could fully describe. Days turned into weeks, and their routine continued. She delivered meals, he accepted them, and they shared brief, meaningful conversations. She began to notice that her own life felt lighter, her heart less burdened by the daily stress of her long shifts. There was a simple joy in knowing that she had a positive effect on someone else's life, even in small ways. One evening, snow began to fall, soft and gentle, covering the streets and rooftops in white. She stepped outside with a container of soup and some bread and saw him waiting. He was shivering slightly under a thin coat. Without hesitation, she handed him the scarf she had tucked inside her coat pocket. "Here," she said. "This will help." He looked at her in surprise, then smiled. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I want to," she replied. "Small things matter." He nodded, and there was a moment of quiet understanding between them. In that silence, the bond they shared felt stronger than ever. It was not about words or grand gestures, but about the quiet care that built trust and connection over time. As the weeks passed, she noticed that he began looking out for her in small ways too. He would ask if she had eaten, if she had rested, or remind her to be careful on the icy sidewalks. The gestures were small, but they mattered. It was as if their quiet acts of kindness had created a loop of care between them, each giving and receiving in ways that neither could fully articulate. One cold morning, she approached him with his usual meal. "I want to do something for you," he said, his voice calm but firm. Her heart skipped a beat. "You don't have to," she said quickly. "I know," he replied. "But I want to. You've been kind to me when no one else was. You've cared. And I want to show you that it matters to me too." She nodded slowly, accepting his words. Sometimes, just knowing that someone truly valued and recognized your efforts was enough. Words were not needed. The sentiment itself was powerful. Life continued in this quiet rhythm. The diner remained busy, the streets noisy, and the world often harsh. Yet within their small connection, there was peace, understanding, and hope. Each act of kindness, each small exchange, continued to ripple outward, changing them both in ways neither could fully see yet. She realized that her days felt lighter, her heart fuller, and her mind more at ease. The simple acts of giving and observing, caring and being cared for, had transformed not just his life, but hers as well. She understood that human connection could be quiet, subtle, and unassuming, yet still have the power to transform hearts, even in the harshness of winter, the cold streets, and the endless grind of her daily work. She found a reason to keep going. It was not wealth, or recognition, or fame. It was the small, meaningful connections that made life worth living. A shared meal, a kind word, a gentle gesture, they were all powerful in their simplicity. As the snow continued to fall, she handed him his meal and scarf, and they stood together for a few quiet moments. The world moved around them, but for a brief period, it felt like their own small universe, a place where kindness, care, and attention mattered more than anything else. She realized that these small interactions were building something larger, a bridge of trust, respect, and human connection. It was not flashy or dramatic, but it was real and lasting. And that, she thought, was far more valuable than anything else life could offer. The days moved forward, each one a repetition of small acts, small conversations, and shared moments. She continued to work long hours, carry meals across streets, and watch him quietly. And he continued to show up, to accept the food and care, to offer small gestures of concern in return. They had created a bond that neither had expected, a connection built from mutual respect, kindness, and presence. One evening, as the sky turned pink with sunset, she reflected on how much her life had changed in such a short time. The simple acts of giving, noticing, and caring had created a ripple effect. Her heart felt lighter, her mind more peaceful, and her days more meaningful. She understood that even small acts of kindness, repeated consistently, could transform lives in ways that were invisible to the rest of the world, but deeply felt by those involved. She realized that life's true treasures were not material or loud, but quiet and unassuming. A shared smile, a warm meal, a thoughtful word, these were the things that mattered. And in that realization, she found hope, purpose, and joy, knowing that even small gestures could change someone's day, or even their life, forever. And so, the routine continued, simple yet profound. She carried food, he accepted it, and their small conversations continued. Each day was another opportunity to care, to notice, to be human in a world that often overlooked the quiet acts of kindness that truly mattered. Through this simple human connection, she found warmth, hope, and the understanding that even the smallest gestures could leave a lasting impact on another person's life. She woke up that morning with a strange mix of calm and excitement in her chest. Winter had almost ended, but the air was still cold and sharp. She wrapped her coat around her and walked to the diner like every other day, her breath visible in little clouds each time she exhaled. She had worked long hours, served countless customers, and learned to manage life with very little. But something deep inside her felt different that day, like something big was about to happen. When she turned the corner and walked past the familiar sidewalks, her eyes drifted across the street. There he was, the man she had helped so many times with leftover food, the man who had given her small gifts of wisdom and shared simple moments of humanity. But today, he didn't look uncomfortable or cold. He wasn't slouched or wrapped tightly against the wind. Instead, he sat upright, his posture calm and confident, as if he belonged there in a very different way than before. She approached him slowly, carrying a warm plate of food wrapped carefully to keep the heat inside. But she froze when she noticed not one, but two tall men standing behind him. They were sharply dressed, their jackets smart and neat, and they looked alert, aware, and protective. Their presence made her pause. She had never been afraid of him, but the guards made the moment feel different, important in a way she didn't yet understand. "Good morning," she said softly, shifting the plate in her hands. He looked at her with a calm smile, his eyes warm and familiar. "Good morning," he replied. "Thank you for the food." His voice was steady, but there was something in his eyes, a quiet strength she hadn't seen before. The two men behind him stood quietly, respectful and still, watching without speaking. They didn't make her feel unsafe, but their presence hinted at something more complex than just friendship or charity. "Are you okay?" she asked gently, her heart beating a little faster. He nodded. "I am, yes. But there's something I want to tell you. Something important." He gestured for her to sit on the bench nearby. She set the plate down, forgotten for the moment, and sat. He took a breath, looking at the calm street that bustled around them. "You've known me for a long time now," he began. "You've given me food, warmth, your attention, and you've treated me like someone who mattered, more than anyone else ever did when I was struggling." You didn't know my story, and you didn't ask for anything in return. You just cared." She looked down at her hands, unsure where this was going. "I only did what I could," she said quietly. "I never expected anything in return." He smiled, but his eyes were serious. "And that is exactly why this matters so much. Your kindness wasn't conditional. It was heartfelt. It reminded me of what it means to be seen and valued, even when a person feels invisible." He paused, as if carefully choosing each word. "I want to show you something." Before she could ask what he meant, one of the men behind him stepped forward, holding a small card and handing it to her respectfully. She took it slowly, noticing the elegant design and the name printed in bold letters. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked at her with a gentle expression. "It's an invitation. Not just an invitation, a chance. A chance for you to step into an opportunity you never expected. Your kindness changed my life. Now I want to make sure that your life is changed too, in a good way, not just here and there, but in something meaningful." Her heart pounded. She didn't know how to react. She had never worked for recognition, or money, or attention. She had helped him because it felt right. But now, looking down at a card with elegance she had only ever seen on TV, she felt both overwhelmed and unsure. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't need to say anything yet," he replied kindly. "Just know this, your care mattered. It made a real difference in my life when I needed it most. And I want to help you in return, in a way that honors that kindness." She looked up, her eyes meeting his. There was honesty there, and something new that she hadn't fully understood until this moment. Gratitude that was deeper than any simple "thank you." It was a gratitude that carried weight, purpose, and a desire to give back in a way that truly mattered. One of the guards stepped forward and spoke gently. "Take your time. Nothing has to change today, but we are here to support whatever choice you make." Their voices were calm, respectful, and kind. They didn't rush her. They simply stood, solid and reassuring. She thought about all the early mornings, the long shifts, the cold nights, the constant struggle to make ends meet. She thought about the simple moments when she had stepped outside with warm food in her hands, sharing more than just nourishment, sharing dignity, recognition, and humanity. And now, here she was, offered something she never once imagined. "I still don't understand everything," she said slowly. "But I do know that I didn't help you because I wanted a reward. I helped because someone had to care. And I'm glad I did." Her voice was steady, honest, and humble. He nodded, a soft smile on his face. "That honesty, that humility, that's what makes you remarkable. You didn't seek anything for yourself. And now you have a choice. You can accept this, whatever you feel comfortable with, or you can continue with your life as it is. Either way, nothing about your worth changes." Tears welled up in her eyes, not because she was sad, but because a moment of grace was unfolding that she had never expected. It was like a sunrise breaking through a long night, gentle, illuminating, and full of promise. She took a deep breath and looked at the card again. It was elegant, professional, filled with an opportunity she had never dreamed of. She realized in that moment that life sometimes surprises you in ways that you cannot predict, that the smallest acts can lead to the biggest changes, and that kindness can ripple out into places you never imagined. I will think about it," she said, her voice soft but certain. "I need time to understand what this means for me." He smiled gently. "Of course. There's no rush. I just want you to know that you matter. Not because of what you did for me alone, but because of who you are." She stood up, her heart full and her mind swirling with emotion. She nodded at him, and then at the two guards, who gave a respectful, quiet bow. She walked across the street slowly, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the cold air. She felt seen, appreciated, and recognized in a way she had never known before. The city bustled around her, busy and loud and full of life, but there was a quiet peace rising inside her heart. She realized that life was unpredictable, that sometimes the smallest moments of kindness can change another person's world, and that even when you don't expect anything in return, the universe has its own way of honoring kindness. She folded the card carefully and held it close, not as a sign of pressure, but as a symbol of possibility. She knew that no matter what happened next, she had already lived a story of kindness that mattered, and that was something no one could ever take away from her God. And in that moment, as she walked back toward her day, toward the diner, toward her responsibilities, toward the life she knew, she carried something new inside her chest. Hope. Not the kind of hope that waits for miracles, but the kind of hope that comes from knowing that kindness, real human care, and quiet love matter more than words, and that sometimes life rewards those not for what they expect, but for what they never thought to ask.